Konza Prairie and our local Konza historian, and he's going to tell us about the history of the prairie, history of this area.
As you said, long-term, emphasize long. And to be a historian, what's the primary qualification? You have to be old enough to remember what happened 150 years ago. So, when you start talking about history, where do you begin? Well, if we were at Manhattan Christian College, I could say in the beginning. But that's too far back. If this were a third grade American history class, I could say 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Still too far back. Land has always been a problem. And coming forward just a little bit from 1492. Oh yeah, you can look at this handsome fellow over on this side. Do you recognize that? There are two kinds of history. The history of the land and the history of the people on the land. Well, right after the Declaration of Independence and before the ratification of the Articles of Confederacy, what were the Articles of this is going to be, by the way, give and take. You're going to have to help me. What were the Articles of Confederation? Now, I don't mean the Civil War kind. Come on, you history buffs.
The original governing body of the 13 colonies.
Beg pardon?
It's the original governing body of the 13 colonies.
Sorry.
That's basically correct, yes. But to get these articles confirmed or ratified, land was a problem. What happens to the western lands? Here we go again. What was meant by western lands in those days?
Anything west of the Mississippi?
Not west of the
West of the Allegheny.
between the Mississippi and the Appalachian Mountains. Those were the western lands. And the states, by the way, these were sovereign states in a confederacy. The states that bordered on the western land says, everything west of my borders belongs to me, right? So Virginia looked like a pretty good sized chunk of territory. So did Georgia. And Virginia claimed all of this up here too. But what happens to New Jersey and Delaware and those folks? Those folks said, not going to ratify these Articles of Confederation until everybody agrees that the western lands belong to the central government. And it took 4 years to get the agreement, but finally that was the agreement. So that particular thing, you think, whoops, I don't want that one yet. Matter of fact, we'll just turn on the lights for a minute, because I can't talk without writing. I'll eliminate Jill's
Go ahead.
part of this. Seems like every year, the governing body of the U.S. passed some act regarding land. There was a lot more land here than there were people to put on it. And they figured, well, we need to get this land in the hands of the people so we can tax it, right? Land has to produce some revenue. So they started passing land acts, and every year more land acts came about. 1785, the first one provided for a rectangular survey of all the land, of the western lands. What is a rectangular survey?
A section?
Pardon?
A section?
That's part of it.
Township.
That's another part of it.
Range.
What they said was, we're going to establish Two lines, one east-west and one north-south. This is called the baseline, and this is called the prime meridian. Okay? So far, so good. Now we're going to survey this off into 6-mile strip this way, a 6-mile strip this way. What is this 6-mile strip called? I'll give you a hint. I'll ask another question. Who can define the term township?
6 miles. 6 square miles, isn't it?
Well, there are 3 definitions. A township is a 6-mile strip, 6-mile wide strip, east-west. And this, if this is the baseline, then this strip is the,
There's more markers on the windowsill.
this strip is township 1 south. And this strip of land would be township 2 south. Okay? And you just keep going. If this is the prime meridian, what is this? This 6-mile strip. Not a township. Not a township. This, now you got it, range. This is range 1 east. And you would have range 1 west. Just like you would have township 1 north. Okay? So now you can see where we're headed. This is a 6-mile square. Well, we're now going to divide that into
That's making me
bunch of
crazy.
smaller
You're gonna need new
squares.
markers. There you go.
Okay.
Rock that down.
So each one of these 6-mile squares is going to be marked on 1, 2, 3, 4, whoops, I missed. Can't count. Going to be divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still can't count. You get the idea anyway. Usually. And what are each of these little squares called?
6.
A section. Okay. So far, so good. But if you have a section, what is that called?
Absolutely.
North Ave. What's that called?
Quarters, northeast quarter.
Northeast quarter. Matt?
Northeast quarter or the northeast quarter?
Northeast quarter of the northeast quarter.
They didn't do 8s back then?
Big Martin?
What, you call that an 8? They just did a quarter.
You say northeast quarter of the northeast quarter, or the southwest quarter of the northeast quarter. That is the rectangular survey.
Which is it? Oh, okay. Okay.
That's the rectangular survey that they provided for the western lands. Big problem. You've got natural boundaries that don't conform to nice squares. So if you have a square like this, but there's a river runs through there, how are you going to call this little piece up here? Well, you could ignore the river, but rivers are hard to ignore. So another method of survey was adopted from what was used in England. It's called meets and bounds. And this is the one you're probably more familiar with. As a matter of fact, on Konza here, there is at least one deed whose description is in meets and bounds, and it starts off beginning with beginning with a fence post, north, west, northwest 20 degrees to a maple tree. Okay, so now you have a direction. You go north, 20 degrees west, and that's where our maple tree is. But we also need some distance in there, right? Because maple tree might be down here. And I don't see my expert that I was going to have fun with this morning. Earl is an expert in everything, right?
Just ask it.
Just like- But really, his father was a surveyor, and Earl knows about distances. One of the distances that was used was a chain. You've heard this old smart aleck question, how high is up? My question is, how long is the chain? Does anyone have any idea?
66 feet.
66 feet, absolutely. The chain consists of links. How big is a link?
Come on, Donna.
I know how big a furlong is.
Pardon?
I put a furlong in my window.
A link is 1/100th of the chain. 7.92 inches. So if we then went up here a certain number of chains and links, we'd find that maple tree, right? Then the deed, and this is a deed for part of the Hokinson place, and we'll talk about Hokinson's a lot more later. It goes over to another fence post. Well, of course, those fence posts are long gone. But that's meets and bounds. And there's only 2 deeds, actually only one, because the other one is so indistinct it's practically useless. On Konza, everything is in rectangular survey. Well, you remember that this thing that I had up here, it only went to the Mississippi River. But in 1803, something happened that changed things drastically. What was that? Louisiana Purchase. The size of the nation was roughly doubled in one fell swoop. We had no more people to put on it than were there to start with. But the size of the nation was a lot more land. So we need to get people onto that land and get it producing some revenue, right? Well, in 1805, they extended the survey to the Louisiana Purchase, and they started surveying the land. In 1830, they passed something called the Preemption Act. Do you know what the Preemption Act was? If I say it was the Squatters' Rights Act, would that mean anything? What the act said was that if you live on a piece of land for 6 months, you have the right to purchase that land for $1.25 an acre. It only applied to surveyed lands, and Kansas wasn't surveyed at that point. So about the only place that the Preemption Act did any good was over in New Mexico territory, which was already surveyed, and the eastern, the western lands of the eastern half, whatever you want to call it, they were surveyed, and that meant that the squatters who were there could buy that land. In 1854, the big thing happened. 54, remember, is leading up to the Civil War. And states were entering the Union 2 by 2. One of the 2 was north leaning and one of the 2 was south leaning. They tried to keep a balance. Kansas, this whole part of the country was known simply as Indian Territory. And, well, let's see. How was Kansas leaning at that point? North or south?
South, started out south.
As a matter of fact, in just a minute I'll show you a slide that will surprise you, I think. But in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. And that gave Kansas and Nebraska territory designation. So Kansas became a territory officially. And the shape of that, well, let's see, the northern boundary was a 48-degree parallel. The southern boundary was down here, I don't know, forgotten what parallel it was, but it was what is now the Oklahoma. By the way, this is the Nebraska-Kansas border. This is the Kansas-Oklahoma border. Went out here. I said the New Mexico territory was already surveyed. This is New Mexico territory. And the Kansas territory went all the way out here to the Continental Divide. Still wasn't surveyed though. Well, in the following year, 1855, and now I can use the clicker. Turn off the lights for a minute. 1855, counties were formed in Kansas. And can you see the names of the counties? Riley County was just this piece here, bounded on the south by the Kansas River. On the east and west by an extension of the Marshall County lines. And that was it. Calhoun County was over here. Where's Calhoun County now? There ain't no such thing. Richardson County? Davis County. Good old southern names. But then we had the influx of the Dan Yankee, or from the people from New England came in and stole, influenced an election. And the names of the counties were changed, right? Also, the boundaries were changed. Every year, some new boundary change took place. Well, then the Civil War started. Sooner or later, Kansas became a state. It doesn't extend all the way out here, and it doesn't include Denver anymore, right? They established the western line at the 26th meridian, but that's 26 degrees from the National Observatory in Washington. Well, we no longer use that particular thing. We use Greenwich time zone, right? So the western boundary of Kansas is 102 degrees and some minutes. Kind of odd number, but it used to be the 26th meridian from the observatory in Washington. In 1862, all sorts of things happened. We were in the Civil War, right? But we're still passing land acts. Congress is great for passing acts. One of those acts was the Homestead Act. We now have the land out here has now been surveyed. What was the what were the provisions of the Homestead Act?
Lived on 160 acres or 35 5 years, build a house on it. There's something else. Insurance.
Okay, 160 acres could be yours if you built a house on it. It didn't say house, it said a dwelling. And that might be a sod house or a cave or who knows what. You also have to till part of the land and have a source of water. Live on it for 5 years and it's yours. Okay? Same year. Railroad Act. And as far as Konza Prairie is concerned, the Railroad Act completely wiped out the Homestead Act. What were the provisions of the Railroad Act?
10 alternating sections, something or other.
Odd-numbered sections within 10 miles of track was given to the railroad. So that all those odd-numbered sections, if you had the railroad track here, the odd-numbered sections within 10 miles of track belonged to the railroad. Okay, that's fine. There was Kansas Pacific Railroad ran along the river out here. So within 10 miles, every odd section of what is now Konza was given to the railroad, Kansas Pacific. Complication, we had two railroads. If the Kansas Pacific got the odd numbered sections, what did the other railroad get? That's all that's left. They got, by the way, that railroad was the MKT, the Missouri, Kansas, Texas, better known as the Katy. The Katy got the even numbered sections. What does that leave for people to homestead on? Not much. Also passed, and by the way, these were individual bills that passed, but they were part of a package. One of these, you vote for my bill, I'll vote for yours. The third was the Moral Act, and we're not talking about M-O-R-A-L. We're talking about Jim's family.
Was that your family, Jim? Jim, is that your family?
Yeah.
The Morrill family. The Morrill Act gave states 30,000 acres for every sitting senator or representative for the purposes of starting an agricultural colony. Okay? So Kansas had 2 senators and a representative, so they got 90,000 acres. But that bill said for every loyal state, remember we're in a Civil War now, every loyal state, so what did Missouri get? Zilch. Alabama? Nothing. Okay? But Kansas got quite a chunk of territory. So those 3 acts made a big difference. There was one other way that the government was trying to get rid of land, and that was by military bounty warrants for people who, this, by the way, began with the War of 18, it actually began with the Revolutionary War when the Continental Congress tried to get British soldiers to desert by promising them land in exchange for deserting the British Army. But in 1812, War of 1812, it became really an official policy. Serve honorably in the military and you get what was called a warrant that entitled you to 160 acres of surveyed land. Well, land in Kansas wasn't surveyed until 1855, so we didn't have much happening around Kansas. But on Konza, there are 3 pieces of land. Let's see.
Just award to Charlie, you got 15 minutes.
Yeah. I'm ready to start the other half. By the way, this slide I kind of slipped over. Ashland Township is in Riley County, right? When the counties were first formed, Davis County was a secondary county, and Riley County was a primary county. Riley County took care of all of the paperwork for Davis County until Davis County got a population of over 600. Ashland Township was originally in Davis County, but Riley County had the paperwork for it for 2 years. Then in 1873, Ashland Township was given to Riley County. Milford Township, which had been in Riley, was given to Davis. Okay? That's what that was for. In the wrong direction. If you'll look at this map of Konza Prairie, right up here in this little corner, there were 3 pieces of land that were granted by military warrant. Everything else on Konza had to be bought from the railroads. Okay? And this is a 1881 plat of Riley County. And you can, if you were close enough, you could see that this odd numbered section, 17, is listed as Kansas Pacific. And even numbered section 20 is listed as the MK&T. That's what we were talking about earlier. One railroad got the even sections, one got the odd sections. Well, that's about the land history of Konza, except what goes along with the people history. The people who lived on Konza early, the first one you'd have to talk about would be C.P. Dewey, Charles Paulson Dewey. And Dewey was born to money. His family had owned a couple of banks and an iron foundry. And when Chicago, remember Chicago Fire? You may not remember it, but it happened. When Ms. O'Leary's cow kicked over the lantern and burned the whole town down, C.P. Dewey was smart enough to go over to Chicago and buy up all the land that he could that people were trying to get rid of because it had been burned out. He held that land for a couple of years and started selling it for a big profit. Took the profit, came out to Kansas and started buying land. He had to buy from the railroad, of course. And his first piece of land that he bought was this little piece right here. If you look right across the creek, you can see that piece of land. But he didn't jump into it and start buying a whole lot right away. That was in 1872, I think. 1872, he bought that first piece of land. He didn't buy a second piece of land, which was down here, until 1876. Bought a couple of pieces. By the way, I say C.P. Dewey. When I say C.P. Dewey, I'm talking about Dewey and his brother Albert, A.D. There's this piece over here, but the main part of his purchases came in 1887 and 88. The winter of 86, 87 was an extremely hard winter. It was known as the winter of the big die-up. And after that winter, people who owned land out here, and there were quite a number of people who did own land, as you can see from this mosaic, tried to get rid of it. And Dewey was there ready to buy it. In the space of about 6 months, he bought over 5,000 acres out here. And he kept adding until it ended up with about 11,000 acres here on Konza and just south. Well, he was buying land not only here, but in western Kansas. Sherman County, out around Colby and Atwood, in that area. He ended up owning about 64,000 acres out there and was leasing or otherwise using about 200,000 more. So he put together a big ranch out in western Kansas, as well as the ranch here. And he brought his son Chauncey out to run the big ranch out there. Well, Chauncey was 21 years old, had no experience running a ranch. He was a little on the arrogant side because family had money. And Chauncey took that acreage out there. And by the way, they had one big chunk, and a piece here, and a piece here, and a piece here, and a pretty good sized chunk there. So what did Chauncey do? He fenced the whole thing in. Regardless of the fact that there were neighbors down here, the Berry family, who objected to being fenced in. Well, kind of. The Berry family didn't make themselves very popular with the Deweys anyway. They shot a couple of prize bulls and rustled and killed a few cattle and cut down fences and so on. Big feud between the Deweys and the Berries. And it ended up with the Deweys killing 3 of the Berry family. And of course, that brought on an arrest. Chauncey and his foreman and his bookkeeper were arrested for murder. CP was not. He had nothing to do with, well, other than the fact he owned the property. But the 3 of them were arrested, tried for murder, and acquitted. It was a very unpopular decision. And they kept pursuing it, and Chauncey was charged with unlawful death. Does that sound familiar? Someone not guilty of murder, but guilty of unlawful death. I don't know what the legal differences in those things are, but that was what happened. And Chauncey was fined, by the way, that was in 1802. I'm sorry, 1902. 1902. And C.P. Dewey died in 1904, just after the trial that found Chauncey not guilty of murder. So that left Chauncey in control of the whole enterprise. Well, C.P. knew how to make money, and Chauncey knew how to spend money. And the short and long of it is that by 1930, Chauncey had run through the family fortune. By the way, when he was found guilty of unlawful death, he was fined $10,000. And rather than pay it, he took off for Chicago, established residence there, and said, "You can't touch me." And they couldn't. Well, he finally did come back to Kansas, lived in Junction City, lived and died in Junction City. He's buried over there. But in 1930, the land had to be sold at a sheriff's sale. You'll notice that on this map, all maps of Konza, this line that runs along here, that is the county line. What county is south of there?
Gary.
Gary. And north of it is Riley. So you have Gary County down here, Riley County up here. The Gary County part of the property was sold to land speculators, who later sold it to Governor Landon's mother-in-law. Okay, so keep that in mind. The northern part, the Riley County part, was sold to a couple of land speculators who held it for a short period and sold it to George Davis. So the Davis Ranch now took care of the Riley County part of what is now Konza Prairie. Well, in 1958 or thereabouts, Lloyd Holbert and others started looking for land to have as a research area. Holbert had talked to Governor Landon, and Governor Landon told him he didn't think it would be correct for the governor to sell property to the university. So they looked around, they found the place that they thought would be the next best. It was called the I Ranch, A-Y-E, which is just east of Highway 177. Right? As you're going south toward the interstate, it would be on your left. But they didn't have the money to buy it. So they started looking around for someone to finance it. And since it was on the market, the Hudson Ranch went ahead and bought the I Ranch. You familiar with the Hudson Ranch? They own a good chunk of the property between here and Topeka. Nothing illegal about it. I mean, the property was for sale, and the Hudson Ranch had the money, and Kansas State didn't have the money. So that was sold kind of right out from under it. Meanwhile, Landon's mother-in-law died and left the property, the Gary County property, to her daughter, Landon's wife, and her two grandsons, Landon's two children. And very shortly, by family trades and so on, it was owned 2/3 by Mrs. Landon and 1/3 by Nancy Landon Casabon. Probably heard of her too. And then the problem is, where do we get the money? Finally, it came about that the Nature Conservancy was interested in the aims of Holbert and his cohort. And they found a donor who would put up the money to buy the Gary County part of the old Dewey Ranch. That was, remember, just this small part down here. 917 acres. So they bought it, and on the same day they made out the deed to Kansas State, to the association. So Kansas State owns 917 acres in Gary County. Well, after a few years, 2 or 3 years, they decided that 917 acres just wasn't enough. We'll get there in a minute.
We're gonna have to wrap it up, Charlie.
Okay,
You've got like 2 minutes.
okay. 2 minutes. All the streams were headed up north in the Riley County area, and as an upshot, they were trying to figure out how to buy a 1 mile strip just north of what they already had. And when the Nature Conservancy started looking into it, they found that the whole ranch could be had. It was owned by then by Dr. McKnight. Fortunately, the land was never broken up into small parcels. So McKnight said he would sell the land if they could find another piece of land equivalent and just make it a swap. That way he wouldn't have to pay taxes on, that sort of thing. So they, Nature Conservancy found land down in Oklahoma, and they made the one-for-one swap. And K-State got the use of the Riley County part. But this time, the Nature Conservancy said, why should we give this to K-State? If we give them title to it, they can build a golf course out there or do whatever they want to with it. So this time, the Nature Conservancy kept title to the land. And that's the way it stands now. Nature Conservancy owns the Riley County Park. Kansas State owns the Gary County Park. And they're all quit.
Maybe you can say Catherine Wardway.
The donor that the Nature Conservancy found was Catherine Wardway, and she requested her name not be made public. It has always been considered that she had never come out here to visit the property. About a month ago, we had an interview with a gentleman who said that he got a phone call one day from a lady who identified herself as Catherine Wardway and wanted him to bring her out here to look around. And they came out here and a burn was performed for her benefit. This is according to this source, I won't say his name. And she actually was here. Now, do we believe him or do we believe the fact that she said she was never out here? All he knows is that some lady came here who identified herself to him as Catherine Wardway. You'll see a sign out just to the north, southeast, southwest of the house with her name on it. One other thing about this whole thing, after she had requested that her name not be used, the Alumni Association posted an article in their bulletin that identified her. And that was as transactions were being completed.
Done yet.
We're kind of screwed up when it comes to identifying Catherine Wardway.
Okay, thank you for but I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Chuck.
Okay, just a few more things. I gave you a handout, and please don't consider that handout to be sacred. Take notes on it, scribble on it, because we're going to talk a little bit about the other people who settled on Konza. And unfortunately, this is kind of dim. This is the ONeill Homestead, and the ONeill Homestead has one feature that is notable. That's this one right here. This is an underground shelter, and that's what it looks like from the front. That's the above ground part.
Yeah. I never know her name.
And that's the underground part. You can see the domed roof, very carefully inlaid with stone. There is a vent that goes through here. And that particular feature is located right about there. So on your map, you can locate that as the ONeill Homestead, and that's where the underground shelter is. Okay? You have an additional homestead. This is the Brunker, B-R-U-N-K-E-R, Brunker Homestead. And there's not much left there except foundations. This is the bison loop, or the bison enclosure fence. You have to go into the bison enclosure to visit these remains. This particular one is an excavated remain, and it's filled with, I'm not sure what all, a lot of barbed wire for sure. That's all you can see from on top. I'd like to see, have that whole thing emptied out and see what might be on the bottom. And this is the remains, nothing but the foundation stones of the main house. And a cellar house over here, but it is not as ornate as the one at the ONeill house. And nothing's left except the foundation. And a stone wall over here.
And so who were the Brunkers?
The Brunkers, Henry Brunker and his wife came here about 1884, as I recall.
Were they homesteading?
They homesteaded. Actually, they bought. You had to buy land. You couldn't homestead it.
Because this was railroad land.
This was railroad land. The whole thing was railroad land. They had 9 kids
While they were living up there?
while they were living out there. Mrs. Brunker died in,
Childbirth?
I recall, no, about 1894 or 1895. Fortunately, the 2 older kids were girls, and they were old enough to take over the housekeeping. And Henry kept the place until 1909, and he sold it to the Dewey Ranch.
So did he have cattle, I'm guessing?
No.
Because you can't farm it.
And that piece is located right here in N1A on the map. N1A has the road going through the middle of it, and it's located right here. And if this had the streams on it, Kings Creek would run right down this AL. By the way, AL stands for Agricultural Lands. So the Broker Homestead is here, the ONeill Homestead is here, and the one that you will see and get most questions about is the Hokanson Homestead, which is this one. The Hokanson Homestead, if you've hiked the nature trail or anything out here, you've seen the Hokanson Homestead, I'm sure. It's located right where Kings Creek Loop joins the nature trail. And this is a good example of what we have done with the kids. To get this map, we had a bunch of 7th graders out here. We split them into 2 groups, into groups of 2, and put them on a transect. And they started over here, and they had to make a transect across there and note down everything within 10 feet of their line, 10 feet on both sides. And after they did their transect and measured and noted what all was there, I got the job of putting it all together and making a map of the whole thing. And this is the outcome. The house used to sit over here. The spring house was over here. And I don't know if you're familiar with spring house or not, but what is its function? Refrigerator. So if you have the house over here and the refrigerator over here, not good for midnight snacks. We'll go over this a lot more when we're down there. It will mean more to you when we're down there. But that is located right here at the junction of Nature Trail and Kings Creek.
And the barn was on your opening slide, if you wanted to go all the way back to your opening slide. You could push
Yeah.
and just,
This is the barn at the Hokanson Homestead. It has had quite a bit of work done to it since.
How do you spell Hokanson?
any way you want.
Yes.
Outside.
It does start with an H and an O.
So, and the barn this year and the spring house would be over behind here. As I say, when we go down there, we'll have a lot more to say about it. The Hokinsons were three brothers. Actually, only two of them ever lived here. The older brother was married when they bought this place.
But they lived here until like the 40s, right, like 48?
Yeah, the son, the original owner was Andrew Hokinson, and his son Carl took over the farm in about 1930-something, I've forgotten the exact date. But this is the only homestead on Konza, other than the Dewey Ranch, Dewey holding itself, that lasted for more than one generation, and it only lasted two. Well, you can figure, what's a homesteader going to do out here? You can't plow the land, except right down along the creek. You can run cattle on it, but how many cattle can you run on 160 acres? You've got to figure at least 10 acres per animal. And if you take out a few acres for your house and garden, you're talking about a herd of 10 cattle. That's not much to work on. Well, then to,
Yeah, you just go forward, the forward button.
that's all right, I'm finished with that anyway. The area right around the house here, now, Chauncey Dewey, C.P. Dewey never lived here. Neither did Chauncey for very long. C.P. Dewey was really a force in the community, however. He was involved in quite a number of things, and someplace here I have a list that I'll read to you. C.P. Dewey had business interests in Manhattan. He was the co-founder of the First National Bank. He owned a livery stable. He started the first sewer system in Manhattan. He helped finance the first telephone exchange. He owned an ice plant and a corn crib, which was supposed to be the largest corn crib in the multi-state area, 200,000 bushels. He had numerous rental houses in Manhattan. He owned a livestock sales pavilion, but his crowning glory was the Manhattan Beach Resort out near the airport. It was built on a cut-off lake where the river used to make a big loop to the north and then cut through and left this crescent lake out there. He built this huge, for the time, resort in 1900, and that's when he brought his son Chauncey out here to run the ranch out west. It lasted until 1903 and it was flooded out. So it lasted a little over 2 years, basically. And the Manhattan Beach Resort was wiped out. It was rebuilt, sold to the Rebeccas, and then fire destroyed the whole mess in 1916. So much for the Dewey Empire. Unfortunately, if you read history of Manhattan, you will very seldom find C.P. Dewey mentioned. And that's because he never became a citizen of Kansas. He kept his citizenship in Chicago. And although he did owned all those different things, you'll very seldom hear his name mentioned.
But he was responsible for building this house and the barn.
No, Chauncey was responsible
Chauncey
for
did
that.
this?
C.P. died in 1904. I mentioned that Chauncey was found guilty and fined for wrongful death. Well, he went to Chicago to get away from that, but he did come back. And when he came back, he had this house built in the barn was built first in 1911. And the house was built in 1912. Walter Bird was the architect, not the architect, but the builder. And that mantle that you see over your head there has a story behind it. They had built the house with the window openings and so on before they put up the mantle, before they built the fireplace. So they took that big stone, brought it in through the window here, and in the process it kind of got out of hand and dropped, and one of the workers was killed.
He wasn't killed.
Well,
Yeah, apparently he wasn't killed. He was hurt and he was taken in, but he wasn't killed.
well, this brings up something else. I've listened to story after story after story, and you don't know who to believe. One says he was killed, the other says he was badly injured. I can believe either one of them. But anyway, the barn was built first, then the house. The Deweys never lived in this house. Now, Chauncey did live here on the ranch for a period of a few years in a house that was located over just east of the burn plots. And again, depending on who you listen to, that house was either a mansion or a mail order house. I tend to believe the second. Although I interviewed one lady who said one of her ancestors had visited out here, and she said they had Chinese servants and the place was a mansion. But some building that was on Konza was moved out to the western ranch. And I tend to believe that it might have been a mail order house that was out here. No proof. So if you want to manufacture your own story and publish that, as good as anything. But there were some other buildings out here that I'll just mention. Just above the old barn, there's a foundation there. And right now you can hardly find the foundation, although the stones are still there, stone flooring and everything. That was a milking shed and buggy house. Part of it was enclosed and part of it was just a three-sided structure. There was also a garage right over here. And there is another gossip story about the garage, and that is that the manager at the time, who was Orville Burtis, liked his drink, and he got loaded one day and burned the garage down. Again, that's one story. I have a whole litany of stories about Orville Burtis. Orville Burtis was the manager for the third owner of this property. The first owner was the Dewey Ranch. The second owner was George Davis. And I'm talking now about the Ryder County part. And the Ryder County and just that little strip of Geary County. The third was Frank McDermott, and McDermott was the owner when Orville Burtis was foreman. Then the last owner, before the Nature Conservancy bought it, was Dr. David McKnight, and his foreman was Ken Berg. But none of the foremen were as, I don't know what term to use, as Orville Burtis.
He was a character.
Infamous.
Colorful?
That's one word, yeah. I think Orville Burtis and Chauncey Dewey would have gone well together. But the time Orville Burtis arrived on the scene here, Chauncey Dewey was in his duties. Incidentally, Chauncey died in 1952.
Did he have any kids?
Yes, he had 2 sons, and they live out in western Kansas on the old ranch, what's left of the old ranch out there. I talked to one of them, and he was very belligerent.
Did that surprise you at all?
Not a bit. And I said, well, could I have your brother's phone number? I'll give him a call. He said, don't even bother, he won't talk to you.
Do they have children? Do you know?
I don't know.
Didn't get that far.
Marilyn Morrill, Jim Morrill's wife, is from western Kansas and grew up with the Berries. So she knew of the Berries. And I said, did you know any Deweys? And she's like, I didn't know any Deweys.
Well, the Deweys that live out there now would have been, well, they wouldn't have been when all the activity was taking place out there. But it's quite an interesting family.